This is the truth. Truth is hard to quantify, and yet truth, freedom, and justice are the American way, are they not? So you may have heard me say that you take the facts to court to find the truth is higher value than the facts, and then there's still a correct way of understanding that truth. Where do we find truth? We don't necessarily find truth in nature. That would be a hard argument to make. But you know where we definitely find it is in fiction, where the author can lay out and tell us ultimately what the truth is, right? Otherwise, we just merely maybe have a sort of correctness. If something's correct enough to fit into the category of true, or not correct enough to fit into the category of true. And so let's move into fictional works for a second. And if this sounds a little bit like Jordan Peterson, that's because we're going to borrow some ideas from Carl Jung. And Carl Jung is where Jordan Peterson is getting most of his ideas. And so he's really out there in the backyard, sort of walking his way in, but he hasn't made it to the porch yet and seen the light. And we're going to offer you that. Truth and light, they're very similar as ideas and concepts, because darkness and deception both disappear instantly in the presence of them. They don't flee, but they vanish. There's some value in that, some higher order that's constructed out of these, and so they act as facsimiles of one another and can be understood as a metaphor for that. Fiction, on the other hand, does have truth. Hard truth, right? Perfect truth. And so Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of plays with this when he tells Luke Skywalker that from a certain point of view, Darth Vader killed your father. His story's been re-edited and reworked several times, and they've never decided to take that line out or rework that piece so that it comes a different way. Now, if we look at stories and we see that there's a higher truth that the author has the right to mesh out, and we say, well, if our universe had an author, then it would have a right to have a higher truth as well. And if storytelling is the place that we find truths, if you want to dismiss that higher author, really what you'd almost have to say is that storytelling is the root of truth. Storytelling's where we find it, and storytelling is something that's a component piece of being human. Dogs don't tell stories, they tell lies. I've yet to hear one tell a tale. And so if you're telling stories, if you're following the hero's journey using the 12-part arc system to create satisfying narratives, then you will find ultimately that you can place truth within your construct. So if the stories contained within religious narratives are true within their narrative and are understood worldly to be true and have an impact, then they're art, right? And so arts that give people meaning and represent a higher truth, because the artist acts as a lens. And the reason I make this argument is that Socrates does. He says that the artist imbues the work with the spirit of the muse, which must come to them and give them the wisdom, for the artist knew not of the great, whatever it was that was in their work, you know. And Socrates had first gone to the politicians who chased him, and then he'd gone to the tradesmen who knew of their trade, but everything else they assumed they knew because they knew a lot about their trade. And so that's really the position that I'm in, isn't it? Now, when we look at fictional storytelling and we find that the truth within the fiction is imbued by the author, what if we want to pivot from that and have truth elsewhere is that we have to understand that people find truth within these stories. They find truth within the narrative, and they require of themselves a satisfying narrative arc. They need a third act: redemption, resurrection, return home. And that is what religion offers to people. And so if you'd like to deny the Bible, I recommend that you read it and study it, because the narratives within would then be the most compelling and important pieces of information. They underpin our Western society. And if you'd like to make arguments against the Bible, atheistically, as a whole, I don't think it makes sense to do it from a scientific standpoint. Plenty of Christians believe plenty of things that are congruent with scientific belief. And so I don't think that you're going to be able to use science to disprove what is a moral framework and understanding. And I don't believe that you'll be able to do philosophy either to take it away. I'd like to just condense the philosophies down to this. Nihilism is the idea that nothing means anything. You can treat others that way, but you can't treat yourself that way. Absurdism is the idea that you get to decide the meaning. You can treat others that way, but you can't, or you can treat yourself that way, but you can't treat others that way. I'm not going to let you treat me however you see fit. And then there's existentialism, which as a whole sort of has an issue with broken objects, that things aren't the thing when they're optimally or suboptimally performing. So a doctor's not a doctor if somebody dies under his care, because There's sort of a meta doctor concept. And the issue with that is that there's no restoration or hope for these broken things, right? And that's what Christianity offers. It offers a higher truth. And so the meta stories ultimately are the most compelling narratives that we as humans have because they offer a third act. So that's just another argument that got me banned off of Reddit. Thank you for watching.